Welcome to another episode of Ken Reads, the segment where I take a follower's experience with a very confusing dating experience that they just had and share my own opinion and 2 cents on it, and also apply an attachment framework if it's appropriate to better understand what the F just happened in this person's experience. Today, I've got a really good letter that really illustrates, I think, what happens when you're engaging with a partner who's exhibiting the dark side of people-pleasing behavior, which is where they're being confusing, manipulative, and controlling, even if they're not intentionally trying to come across as being abusive. And they leave you feeling completely low in self-worth. They make you feel like you're, just being completely discarded for their own benefit. And you're also left with more questions than answers. So a very familiar story for a lot of us who are in this attachment recovery space. So this letter today was brought by a person I'm going to call Laura, and it involves her partner, Jake. So we're going to get into Laura's story, and I'm keen for those of you that are interested, if you want to share your 2 cents, you're very welcome to, as always. I can see someone here says, I'm hurting every effing day. I hate it. I feel for you. I'm really sorry that you're going through this. And I don't want to say anything toxic positivity like, it'll get better, because it does, but not for quite some time. It's one of the most, if not the most emotionally excruciating experience you can go through. Anyways, let's go through this together, shall we? Okay, so Laura writes, I matched with Jake online. He wrote paragraphs, seemed very interested. During that time, my father sadly died, so I was away from everything and we stopped talking. Jake tried to message. After I felt ready, we reconnected after 3 months. I live about 2.5 hours drive away. Jake suggested we meet, but he was about to go traveling for 2 months. I said, I'm dating intentionally to meet a partner, so maybe we shouldn't meet if he's leaving. He assured me he was dating with intention too. We didn't meet, but then we stayed in touch and a relationship grew online. I just want to take a moment here to say, Laura, I know a lot of people who've been in similar positions where they know the person they're seeing has plans to move. And I think it's wonderful that you were just like, let's not, try and grow anything here if you've already got plans to go somewhere else. So good on you for doing that. And it sounds like you both handled it pretty well for now. So anyways, we talked daily. He sent photos, travel updates. He randomly went dark 5 days over Valentine's. How interesting. When he got back, it took 3 weeks to meet. I realized he didn't like committing to plans in advance. He drove to me first. We spent our first weekend together. We got on extremely well. We were intimate. He shared various details of his past, how his parents fought. His mum was punitive to him for not doing well at school. He ran away a lot. He now prefers living alone and is devoted to his friends. For the next 2 months, we were in daily contact with calls and texts. He shared his daily life with me. We met as often as possible, taking turns to drive, spending days together at a time and surfing together. Sounds great. He told me, you're amazing. You're someone I could love. What's here is gorgeous, with his hand on my chest. Very romantic. I could have it all with you if only I could jump on that horse. He would panic and send double texts if I didn't answer. Despite telling me he was dating with intention, he became cagey around exclusivity and needed to go slow. He brought up his ex a lot, but always claimed to be over it. He cheated on her and stopped communicating with her to the point she was forced to end it. At times, he would nitpick my clothes, makeup, food choices. He often became cold and closed off when I sought reassurance. He later apologized. Sex reduced from the time we met. He once avoided it altogether, went cold and told me he wanted to be free to sleep with other women and be honest about it. Oh God. He then was sorry and asked to forget everything he just said. Don't know if you could just forget that. I tried to set a boundary around last-minute plans. He got stressed and said, I can't give you what you want. I need some time. I've not been fair to you.
and other confusing statements. Hell yeah, they're confusing. We didn't talk for days. Things went downhill. His communication faded. He was hot and cold, didn't call much, left text unanswered, became busy. When asked for clarity and conversation, he said he'd reply as soon as he can. I heard nothing for 3 days, so I ended things by text because he would not communicate. Good on you. 2 months later, we met as I wanted answers. Again, good on you. We slept together. He told me all the other women he'd been with in the past weeks. Ugh. I was shocked. There were at least 5. One as young as 20. He's in his 30s. And he also shared drama like a fake pregnancy and 2 other girls who knew one another, so one got very angry. Yeah, I can imagine. I got the feeling some were in the picture whilst we were still seeing each other before. He then kept asking me if I think he is a monster. Well, I'm going to just help him out by saying he's behaving like one. He's certainly behaving like he can just do whatever the fuck he wants to do without any consequence. So I'll happily help him out by just saying, yeah, this behavior is definitely in monster territory, not okay. And Laura goes on to ask some questions of me. And she says, I don't know what was real or wasn't, whether I've just been taken for a ride and manipulated this whole time. I'm still in pain, disbelief, cognitive dissonance and ruminating. I feel I can't trust myself or other people. I don't really have any specific questions. I'm just a bit of a mess and don't really understand what just happened. Yeah, fair enough. I would just like to hear your take on it and what jumps out to you or fits with any framework that it can explain their behavior. Oh, believe me, it's coming. As I've been left feeling very used, hell yeah, and like in the end, I'm not good enough for that person, even though they were very into me to begin with, because they moved on so swiftly to others. In the end, they apologized and said they need to evolve and they aren't ready for a relationship. Bullshit. I reckon they're moving on to someone else with that excuse. But that's so very confusing as they were already involved with other people so quickly. Yeah, exactly. I don't know if I ever meant anything to them or if I even really knew them at all. Fair enough. Okay. Laura also had some additional material that they wanted to share with this particular letter. And they went on to say a couple of key things that I wanted to just add. This person told me, you're the first person I've wanted to try to be in a relationship for at least 3 years. Then after it ended, they told me a long list of things they love about me, but they don't feel like they found enough spark. And realize they don't want a partner at all. That one day they'll meet someone who makes them feel fireworks. Eye roll. They often made jokes that created a feeling of distance and uncertainty, like pretending to forget my name. Or at the end, joked that I'm not the one because I can't do a kick flip and don't perform certain acts in bed. I forgot to ask in the questions section if some of this behavior and devaluing of me could be considered abusive. Hell yeah, it can. I also want to thank you for all the work you are doing. Your content is helping me to deal with this experience so much. You're very welcome, Laura. Okay, let's go back to this letter of Laura's and get straight into the meat and potatoes of this experience. And this is fucked, if I'm completely honest, on so many levels. It's really, really bad. I want to say, firstly, I'm really sorry that you've been through this, Laura, because it's a very relatable situation I think a lot of people have gone through. And I'm going to just say I'm sensing mega fearful avoidant vibes with a leaning on the dismissive side of things. But this is giving me mega fearful avoidant vibes. Why? Because there was a lot of showing up intensity in the early stages of dating. Plus, what I find really interesting was about how, he was saying things to you about his enthusiasm for you and also his interest in you. And if you didn't respond immediately, he apparently panicked and was double texting you. You'd rarely see a dismissive engage in that kind of behavior. But a fearful avoidant who definitely understands what it's like to have a degree of anxiety in dating, oh yeah, that would definitely come up from time to time, for sure. And I think that when it comes to him saying the things that he said, this is someone who sounds like someone who is a bit of a helpless romantic. And I'm not using that to excuse him, but just to say the way he shows up in this relationship where initially, he's committing to, connecting with you, the way in which he wants to try and like enjoy, in truth, like love bombing you with a lot of this stuff, saying things like, what's in here touching your chest is gorgeous and you're someone I could love. There's like a unique combination of like love bombing and future faking and that avoidant part coming out, which is, if I could get into this, then I could jump the bridge. Someone here says, I don't know, sounds more like a narc than an avoidant. Fuck no. Like, no. Sorry, I will be the one to say, no way. This does not scream narcissism to me in like the extreme sense of the word, but there does seem to be very narcissistic like behavior. To me, when I hear this, I just think, yes, it's abusive. Yes, it's really love bombing. And yes, this guy is obviously someone who's played around with a lot of women. But I'm actually going to say, to be honest, it actually feels more sex addiction territory than someone who's overtly trying to get supply out of someone because they are trying to get a raise out of people. The whole like nitpicking part that we see later on doesn't feel like a devaluation as such as more of just fault finding, which avoidants do a lot, particularly when they're getting closer to someone. The fact that he also had issues around, having clear plans to meet up with one another, and the fact that he got really, quite triggered whenever you try to have boundaries around facilitating when we meet up, the time that we meet up, makes me think he wasn't going into it from the reading this. He wasn't going into like a narcissistic rage being like, you can't set boundaries with me. But what he was doing was backpedaling from what you both were engaging with, because it sounds to me like, he didn't like feeling controlled, even though you were setting reasonable boundaries throughout this entire thing. And to me, it seems like when you're asking for reassurance, he's apologizing for this, which makes me think, so he does know that he's behaving badly in this. God, I would hate to be someone like Jake, where you're living every day worried that you're a narcissist, because fuck me. Someone is asking you about the connection between sex addiction and avoidance. I gotta tell you, in my experience, they almost go hand in hand for some avoidance, because sex addiction is a great escapism. I want to also take a moment here to say that I read an article many moons ago that was talking about someone who's described as a romantic narcissist, someone who basically gets high on the idea of romantically getting involved with someone, but actually when push comes to shove and you're actually going to commit to the person, you get cold feet and you back away. You've basically left someone feeling confused and hurt. And I took issue with that article because this is the whole issue that I have with applying narcissism to this particular subject matter is, if you've truly had an experience with a narcissist, it is not the same as being with an avoidant attacher. Why is that important? Because we need to make sure that we're validating people's experiences to be like, what you're going through is consistent with this group of people. Sometimes there's overlap. And look, if you want to use a term, you're behaving in a way like a romantic narcissist, go ahead. If it makes you feel like it validates your experience, you're welcome to. But the issue I have when we try and blend these two together almost arbitrarily without discernment is that we then start making it seem like these Machiavellian moustache-twirling people are somehow the same as people who are at their core, and I'm not saying it's okay, and I'm not saying these people can just go off, off scot-free, who are unintentionally abusive. Doesn't mean it's okay though. And so I want to just say, yes, both groups of people are fucking terrible on the receiving end for different reasons. But when we start using language like, this person is a narcissist, as opposed to this person has just attachment issues, it changes the ball game quite completely in terms of the validation process. And to be honest, I've worked with clients who've come from narcissistic relationships, and though there can be some similarities and overlap at times with the recovery journey, Actually, it's quite different when you're having clients who have protracted relationships with narcissists versus protracted relationships with avoidance. There are significant differences that need to be addressed in the recovery journey. And frankly, people often are offended when they're told your partner's a narcissist, when in fact it's like, no, they fucking weren't. Like, this person wasn't malicious or, nasty. They're just annoying at worst, and their behavior is abusive. So that's why I get very, very passionate about saying, please use language, labels with discernment, because at the end of the day, it's got to feel real for you and also feel consistent with your lived experience. And if we're just jumping the gun being like, everyone's a fucking narcissist, you're actually doing yourself more harm than good, because you're essentially basically creating a fiction to explain what happened to you. And it's like, hold up a second. Let's not, go off. Exactly. It can be a cop-out. And also, lest we forget that whilst, we got to remember this too, people who've actually dated narcissists, they actually need support for themselves too, to be like, listen, what you've gone through is not the same as this category of people too. People who go through narc abuse, go through an entire different dimension of crap that needs proper care and validation. There's often a domestic violence situation with a lot of those cases as well too. It is simply not the same as when you're dealing with someone who frankly is an addict to relationships. And that's what we see a lot of the severe fearful avoidance behaving in that category. And so that's why it requires a different approach, because you have to acknowledge, this person clearly cares and loves for you in their own unique way. Their own unique way, though, is still problematic, and this is how it shows up. So just want to put it out there and say, please be mindful. If you want to say this person is a narcissist, you're welcome to do so, but know that it may not necessarily be accurate depending on the circumstances. But let's go back to dissecting Jake and his behavior. So, I find it really interesting how anytime, on one hand, you got a guy who's enthusiastic and telling you such romantic things, saying, I could fall for you. If only I could jump on the horse, I could get to be with you too. We know from future conversations that he's also not over his ex. He's also had multiple women in the picture behind him as well too, that he's seemingly filled up that time between when you saw him and when you connected with him recently. He's gone back to other women. To me, when I hear this, I just think, okay, this man has appalling self-esteem. He doesn't like feeling controlled. That was clear from his punitive mum, where obviously he probably felt quite enmeshed and controlled by her. So what's his natural inclination whenever things feel controlling? Oh, it's to run away. So he's not, exactly moving too far from the tree in which he fell from. And we can also see too that whenever he doesn't feel good about himself, his inclination is, I need to reach out to someone to feel better about me. And to me, it seems like these rationalizations of like, I don't need to be in a relationship, I just need to be single for a while. It seems like he's just coming up with all these different ideas for how to improve and better himself without actually taking any action and initiative to address the core issues that are causing this to happen in the first place. It sounds to me like he's actually quite aware that he has problems. The fact that he's ruminating on the fact that he's worried about coming across as a monster, gotta tell you, I've engaged with a lot of fearful avoidants who are quite severe, who worry that they are a monster inside of themselves. Again, it goes back to their core wound of, I don't want to be a bad person. But funny how this often works out. When I hear this, I just think this is a man who's in big emotional distress, who's causing a lot of problems for people around him, like you, Laura. But here's the twisted thing, is I do think he is getting attached to a lot of these women. I think he is, I think the things that he's saying aren't necessarily false. I do get the impression he was trying to get close to you. I don't think he'd be saying shit like he said to you. And you got to also think about it too, right? When I personally think of a player or a narcissist who's just using you and rinsing you dry and then moving on to someone else, there's more rational, methodical thought put into it. If you're going to be a player, you have to actually be very meticulous. You can't be operating from a limbic system that's going crazy due to attachment issues. You have to have very strong boundaries around intimacy, because it's based on, I get what I want and I move on. I get what's here, and if we breach the code of conduct, the contract that we've communicated, I move on. But what I'm sensing here with this guy is that what seemed to cause him to freak out was closeness. Whenever you guys got close, it caused him to pull away. You broke it up because obviously he wasn't communicating after you asked for more reassurance and commitment from him, and that caused him to stop communicating with you altogether. To me, it just made me think he's behaving irrationally. He's not behaving from a logically grounded place. He's just getting hooked on the dopamine and the excitement, which doesn't mean what he's feeling is wrong. And it's not to say that he was just manipulating you. But to me, when I hear this, like the fact that the sex was diminishing over time like that makes me think, I think that over time, the closer he got with you, he was just starting to withdraw sexually, physically, emotionally, romantically. And that was the trigger throughout this entire episode with Jake. And I feel like Jake's issue is one that, you know, he's, as this person was saying, do they feel inherently lonely? I'm going to just say this guy sounds like he's madly lonely and suffers from a lot of separation anxiety. And he constantly needs to go from woman to woman to woman to not only feel better about himself, to also feel a sense of connection, but also the minute he gets that connection and closeness, he's out. But I got to tell you, this is not an isolated case. I have heard of so many Jakes in my time. There are lots of people who are like this, and this is abusive behavior and it's not okay. So I don't think I would go so far as to say narcissist. Sex addict, more likely. I definitely say there's definitely addiction sort of stuff that's going on, and definitely not okay with, you know, how he's played. And I can promise you that he'll probably swing back around to you whenever he feels bored and lonely and feels like there's an opportunity to reconnect, because this is what they do. I want to really impress this upon people. Fearful avoidance, when they're in there wounding and dismissive and anxious attaches, they're not thinking logically. They are not thinking like, you know, they're not thinking with calculation. I know a lot of you come to me and you say things like, oh, well, you know, they're going through a really tough time at work. Maybe they weren't thinking about, you know, me and the relationship because they had other priorities on. I got to tell you, particularly avoidance, when they're in their severe avoidancy, you give them way too much credit for what's going on in their head half the time, and you think they're really thinking about my position with them and the relationship, their partner, you know, they're going through something with their business partner, they're going through something with like their mum or their dad, and that may be affecting, you know, how they see things. I gotta tell you, the stories you create to justify their behavior and the way you think that they're operating far exceeds what they're actually going through logically. I gotta tell you, in those moments, they've gone to emotional hell land where they're doing whatever they can to avoid you. Why? Because they can't handle closeness. Why? Because it's too distressing for them, because they lose control of a lot of their own emotional stuff that they've been suppressing for a long time. Whenever I hear people say to me things like, do you think that maybe they're doing this because they're being mindful, considerate, thoughtful about, you know, me and the relationship? Well, let me tell you this, if they were, they would have spoken to you about it. Do you really think that classic example, and I hear this a lot with fearful avoidants who've had bad relationship experiences, or they've had a really bad experience with like a boss or a manager or someone in their life, and you're concerned about it because they've been talking to you about like this problematic ex that they've had, how bad it was, and you might be thinking, oh, well, maybe they're behaving this way because they're worried that I'm going to be abusive like their ex. If they haven't brought that up with you and have been explicit with you about it, what makes you think you are even remotely in that range of behaving badly like one of their past relationships? When healthier, more earned, securely attached individuals have a genuine issue that is related to a triggering past, they talk about it. They go, hey, this experience is reminding me a little bit too much of an experience I went through recently with an ex, boss, whatever it may be that's relevant. Can we talk about it? Because I love you, I love hanging out with you, but I really want to engage and talk about this because this matters to me and I don't want this to get in the way of our relationship. You don't act out your trauma by not involving your partner and just backing out completely and not telling them, hey, I got triggered by closeness just a second ago. Now, I know you might worry that I'm doing this because I've been going through some tough stuff at work and I'm just feeling a bit overwhelmed. The reality is it's actually not work. What I'm not able to deal with is the amount of pressure I feel on myself to commit to you, the amount of pressure I put on myself to actually engage with a lot of these work issues that are going on, I just feel like running away. And I know that's not healthy. Oh, but they don't have those conversations, do they? Because often a lot of the time they're operating from a limbic system. I'm not saying that they don't deserve care and treatment and help. They absolutely do. But I just want to go back and remind everyone, it's very easy to think these people must be coming up with all these logically sounding, rational ways to navigate their relationships. They're not. A lot of this is very emotionally driven. And the minute that you can recognize that a lot of this is caused by a very dysregulated nervous system, not some, mustache twirling, conniving experience, I think you will feel a lot better about what you're going through. Because as this person correctly says, I hate that we feel like we are pressuring them when we're not. It's their past that's basically causing them to feel and respond this way. I will go back to the story of what I've been reading about Laura's story with Jake. It's interesting how he was very clear that growing up with a punitive mother ultimately led him to run away from the problem. What does he do whenever there's boundaries and reasonable attempts to try and communicate a relationship? He runs without involving you and discussing it. That childhood wounding is far stronger than any rational process to try and talk it out with you and to have a conversation. Now, with all that seeming criticism to one side, I want to take a moment here for Jake's credit and say, I think this guy, on the other hand, sounds like he also was and still has the capacity to be a lovely, loving guy. I think that you probably didn't fall for him because of all this behavior that came out and is problematic. You probably fell in love with him or also felt deep feelings from Laura because, gotta tell you, many fearful avoidants are phenomenal daters and lovers, albeit for the first few stages. And I think that they do deserve a lot of love and care. Should they also get a lot of treatment and therapy? Hell yes. But I also want to say that I don't think you fell in love with a mirage. A lot of people who are fearful avoidants are excellent in the early stages of dating and can come across as very mindful of what you're looking for. Helps when they've gone through dealing with very difficult caregivers because they're usually very attuned to what their difficult caregivers want. So naturally they can be very good at doing that for you too. Was this manipulation at work? I think what I would say is it is manipulative behavior, but it's not done consciously. I think that a lot of this behavior blends a lot of things together. Enthusiasm, getting too high on the romantic side of things, getting too excited, by the prospects of where this is going, having so much fear and anxiety about being controlled and being in a relationship that I ultimately think he is the architect for his own destruction and destructive behavior in this relationship. I genuinely don't think this guy has a nasty bone in his body intentionally. That nitpicking side of him when he was starting to pick at your makeup and your clothes and your this and your that, I think is a defensive mechanism to try and protect himself, but it went out in a really bad way. I want to take a moment here to say I had a follower reach out. Sorry, tsunami on my side. I had a follower who reached out to me to talk to me about DAVO, abuse, and avoidant attaches. DAVO is when you deny, attack, reverse the victim and offender role, a term that's almost perfectly describing what happens when you're in like a really nasty relationship with an avoidant, a domestic violent offender. Sorry, not an avoidant, a narcissist. Freudian slip on my part. When you're dating a narcissist or someone who's like a domestic violence offender. And we were talking about, when you're dealing with people who are unintentionally abusive, it's hard at times, I think, to use the language that we use to describe classical abuse with unintentional abuse. Because when we talk about unintentional abuse, I think one of the challenges I run into with this as a concept is it's unintentional, but does it mean it's still not painful and valid, if not at times more painful? And my answer is, I think it absolutely is. Like, I've had plenty of people who've dated people who are domestic violent offenders and narcissists, and they've often gone on to say, one was bad, the other was, particularly with the avoidance situation, crushed me in ways that I never thought would even be possible. And so I don't want to invalidate one and say one is necessarily worse than the other, but I also want to state too that this is a bit of a burgeoning space, in my opinion, where it's like, how do we honor people who've gone through traditional what I would call active abusive relationships versus being on the receiving end of unintentionally abusive behavior. Because I think that we need to have space to have language that honors and respects people who've gone through the unintentionally abusive stuff that is still, and at times, far more devastating, depending on a person's context and experiences, whilst also still honoring people who've gone through the classically, abusive experiences of someone who's overtly abusive. So it's something I'm looking into because I think there does need to be, like I said, a glossary, a term, and, ways that we delineate and say, doesn't matter what you've been through, even if it wasn't classical abuse, overt abuse, unintentional abuse still causes scarring for a lot of people's psyche that frankly, a lot of us are never going to be completely separated from forever, but we will eventually heal, in time, hopefully. I can't always say everyone will heal, but, I can say that a lot of us, with time and effort can eventually recover from it too. But I just want to round out this little piece here before I do a quick 4 minutes of questions, because I got to run, is just to say, I think the key thing that I wanted to say to you, Laura, off the back of your experience with Jake, 1, I'm really sorry that you went through that. 2, I can understand if you're feeling a lot of low self-worth off the back of this, but I can assure you that this behavior is him, not you. And you probably do feel, understandably used, because I think this guy is a user of people when he's feeling shitty about himself and wants connection. I don't think that he's Machiavellian or malicious, but I do think his behavior comes off that way. And I think he's letting his wounding run the ship. And that is deeply problematic for so many reasons. Anyways, I'm going to round out my little piece here. Thank you very much again for that. And I'm going to now just quickly, speed run some questions, and then I've got to run. But I hope that that was a validating segment for people who've gone through similar experiences to this, because this is something that I've seen so many people go through. I can see someone here has asked me, how do we submit a question, or it's actually a letter like this? So I've got a submission page on my website. You can go to the link in my bio. It's a paid submission, by the way, because your boy likes to be, earning money for the work he does here to talk about this. And it's $49.99 Australian dollars. And so what you can do is you can go to the link, submit your letter in like a, Google Doc PDF format, and then you can then submit payment afterwards, and I'll receive it. And I'm just working my way through all the letters that I have, and I will slowly bring my team to join in these lives, so that way you can see them and how they talk about these situations as well. It's also good for you to just meet the team, because I ain't the only one who's here, and they're more available than me much of the time as well too. So that's that. All right, speed running time. Let's do this. After the discard and no contact, do DAs ever realize they were just fault finding, or do they forever believe you just weren't compatible? 2 things happen. I think on one hand, they deeply do know that they were probably fault finding, but I think their rationalizing is so good that they often suppress that part of them that knows better to make it seem like, yeah, they just weren't the one for me. But again, that's the severe end. How do avoidants justify in their minds coming back months later? As an anxious person, I do not understand how this cycle works. They justify it in their head by thinking, well, we had great times together. It's part of the Phantom X syndrome. They start romanticizing you, thinking about how amazing you were together, and then that encourages them to come back to you and forget seemingly of all the faults they saw in you when they were coming back. It's euphoria driven. It's often nostalgia driven, and so they're not thinking rationally. It's often like they're being overrun by a lot of romantic feelings, and also at times a bit of a shyness to try and reach back out. That's why they come back with so many of the, hey, how are you? Hi messages, where it makes them seem like they're just F-boys or F-girls and they're not actually serious, when it's like, no, these people genuinely want to come back to you. Hell, they might even come back to you with like random text messages too. Let's see, what else have we got here? FA bought me a Christmas gift, then broke up 2 weeks later. God, you want me to speedrun this? Fearful Avoidant bought me a Christmas gift, then broke up 2 weeks later. I tried to give her back the present, but she insisted I keep it so I could remember the good times we had. Told her I was too distraught from being blindsided to want it, and obvious tears collected in her eye. Can you explain her reactions? So a lot of fearful avoidants wax lyrically about how, but we had such a great time together. We don't need to like break up and, end things. They don't like closure. They don't like ending things with finality. They don't want to feel like a bad person. So you confronting this person basically saying, I can't accept this because this makes me feel bad, probably provoked a lot of shame inside of them and made them feel really bad about themselves because of how they behaved, and they didn't like that. The gift was probably a bit of a peace offering to be like, we can still make this work and have a happy ending to this situation. And I don't think they liked being confronted with the damage that they'd done. All right, one more, and then I'm running out of here. How would a fearful avoidant ex feel seeing the person they dumped on a date? Ran into her 2 months post-breakup. It can elicit so many reactions depending on where they're at post-breakup. Sometimes they'll give you, they'll blank you. They'll give you the silent treatment and act like a real immature jerk and not even acknowledge you. And that might be in a phase where they're trying to where they're feeling really angry about anything that, they had to do with you. Because you've got to remember, fearful avoidants don't like feeling like a bad person. So they often project a lot of their own stuff onto you to feel better about themselves post-breakup. So that might be one reaction. But if they've had enough time to get over their anger and they realize, I actually miss and really want to reconnect with this person, they might act like nothing has changed between the two of you. And it's really jarring because it makes you feel like, I thought you said you didn't want to be with me, but you're acting and it feels like you actually do want a relationship. All right. Thank you all for being part of this wonderful segment. As always, I got to run. But I just want to reiterate, if you're interested in submitting me a letter, I have a dedicated submission link in my bio as part of my link tree. It's the first option, and you can pay and submit your letter there. Other than that, though, thank you as always for your submissions. Thank you, Laura, for your submission, as this was a really good letter. And I very much look forward to coming back around soon to do another one. I might try and sneak in another one this week, but we'll see how it goes.